Welcome back to another episode at Master Asian Core. What are we going to talk about? In the last couple of episodes, I start talking about the basics. I talk about an activity in Scrum, the backlog refinement, and then the last episode I talked about a sprint. So today we're going to continue on that theme. We're going to talk about sprint planning. So we're going to talk about sprint planning. Today we're going to talk about sprint planning. So what is sprint planning? What are we going to talk about in terms of sprint planning? So number one, what is sprint planning? So sprint planning is an event in Scrum. It is, I consider it as the first event in a sprint. Now this is a time when the team gets together and plan for what are they going to do for their upcoming sprint. And the sprint could be in 1 week or 2 weeks duration or 3 weeks or 4 weeks. So team gets together to figure out what are they going to deliver in this sprint. When is sprint planning? So like I said, sprint planning is the first event in sprint. So you would want to do it as the first thing at the beginning of the sprint. So for example, if you are running your sprints and your cadence is 2 weeks and you start your sprint on a Wednesday, I would pick for co-located teams, usually I like them to be at the beginning of the sprint, which is in the morning. So Wednesday morning, the first thing you come in the morning, that is sprint planning. You will end your sprint the day before, everybody goes home fresh, come in the next morning, start your sprint planning. How long is sprint planning? So for me, there's a specific time frame I like to keep them at. Usually it's about an hour. Now that may sound small for some of you, and if you look into what you're doing during sprint planning, you can't figure out there are certain things that you do. There are some teams that do sprint planning that includes backlog refinement activities. Usually I don't like doing that. I like coming into the sprint planning where we have done all our backlog refinement, our stories are all well groomed, check out my video before when we talk about backlog refinement. So ideally it's a matter of just coming in and doing sprint planning. So if that's the case, then it shouldn't take you more than an hour, all right? So for a 2-week sprints, I expect about an hour. Who goes to sprint planning? So number one, product owner, okay? So the team, everyone on the team, the Scrum Master. And then anybody that is needed to support the stories in the event that there are questions that may come up from the team. So at the basic minimum, you have your product owner, the team. The team should comprise of your developers, and if some of you have QAs, and make sure QAs are in it. I know there are teams that don't differentiate between QAs and developers. That means everybody that is doing the work should be in it. And then of course there's the Scrum Master as well. So what about if you are not collated? Well, if you have teams that are not collated, then I would say yes. The answer is yes, they should be invited, they should be part of it. Because guess what? This is when the team gets together to commit together as one. So you want everybody to be in there so that any questions that comes up may be answered before they commit to the work. All right. So the way it works is that we want the product owner to be there to provide information about the stories. The team commits, and the Scrum Master ensures that all questions are answered. And it's almost like a facilitator of the event. You don't need to be the facilitator, but it could be. So Scrum Master may end up being the facilitator of the meeting. Ideally, usually if it's self-organized, then it's anybody in the team. What is the outcome of sprint planning? Why do we do sprint planning? Okay, so the outcome of it is this, is that we know, the team knows, okay, no, I would say the team knows what are they going to deliver in 2 weeks. It is a sprint backlog. So out of a backlog, they are going to pick items from it and they're going to put it into what we call a sprint backlog. And this sprint backlog is what the team is committed to work on for the next 2 weeks. Also is a sequence of work that comes up from it. Right? The outcome is team knowing what to do, what to build, how or the order of work they are going to deliver it. Okay, so those are the two things: is what it is, how it is, and usually out of sprint planning also there is a sprint goal. The sprint goal is there to help the team prioritize the work. In the event that they cannot get to all of the items that they commit to do, then they're going to pick on the things that are going to help them achieve their goal, the sprint goal. So those are the outcome from the sprint. Okay, so this is something that I think people don't think about, and or maybe some people do, but I do see teams that they just jump into it and try to do sprint planning. Before you get to doing sprint planning, there are some things that you should have, and they are what we call a must-have, and then there are I call them nice to have. If you don't have it, then that's okay. And this is what is the item that as prerequisite to sprint planning. So of course, before you get the sprint plan, you should have an ordered backlog already. All right. An ordered backlog is, what is the highest priority, number one, or what is the first thing that needs to come out from your backlog, or what is the first thing the team should pick from in your backlog. Have them ordered. You should have it ordered. You should have already looked at the story, gone through backlog refinement. It has met your definition of ready. In other words, your story has followed the invest model. It has an estimate to it and a sizing to it. If you're doing estimation, you should have that. And the team understands what is needed to get done. Also, you should have acceptance criteria. When the story is done, how can we accept it? So the team should have that in the stories already. So the four things that I think usually is what I look for as a minimum is, did the story meet the invest? Is it in the right size? Does it have an estimate? Does the team understand what is needed to get done? And does it have an acceptance criteria? Those I think is a must-have. All right. So should have that before you walk into a sprint planning for each of the stories, so that the team can pick from it and understand what to do. Now, there are stuff after you've done this a couple times, after you've run sprint a couple times, there are things that would probably need, that could help you more. And this is number one, I would say, team capacity. You get to a point where you understand your team capacity. How much bandwidth do you have, right? So team capacity is nice to have. I would say probably along the border of should have and nice to have, because when you walk in, you can say for the next 2 weeks, if you run 2 weeks sprint, that, how much time am I allocated? How much time am I allocated to this 2 weeks for this work that I'm trying to do? Are you going to be here 5 days a week? Are you going to be here the full 2 weeks? Or, half time is gone? Use a simple calculation, right? Really simple. Find a simple way to find your capacity. It's as simple as maybe, if you have 5 people on the team, and if you're running 2 week sprint, which is about 10 days, so what you do is, if everybody's available, it's 100%, right? If one person is taking vacation, right? Taking vacation for half a week. So all you do is really simple, right? So count like that person as 0.5, right? Because half of the week is also 0.5. So you start counting that way, 0.5. So out of 5 people, that's half. So assuming, count them as 1, assuming 1 person per day, use them as a small using basic calculation as 1, unit of 1. So it's 5, 10 days, that's 50 points, right? Not 50, but 50 units somehow. That they get at 50, and I cut half of it and then do a simple calculation of it. You don't have to go into detail and hours and things. Just a real simple calculation, just to get a rough idea of what is your capacity. Okay, so once you have a capacity, you tend to look at what we call historical data. If you start having historical data in terms of velocity, how much in the past 3 sprints have we delivered? That should give you a guide, right? Again, it is a guide. If you're doing 3 sprints, every 3 sprints you're doing 50 points, it doesn't mean that you should lock yourself into 50 points, okay? It could be that's just kind of roughly where your capacity is. You can roughly do about 50 points. If you start seeing about 100 points, team committing 100 points, then maybe that shouldn't be a good idea. Or you should start asking the question why. So again, this is a guide. Use it as a guide. So those are a couple of things that you need to go into sprint planning. So how do you run a sprint planning? What is the format? How do you execute? So it's real simple, right? This is how I like to see it done. Real simple. Product owner comes in, shows the backlog, pick the first story in the backlog, which should be ordered already. So they'll take the first story on top and says, let's talk about the stories. Team, do you understand? Usually product owner reads through them, ask the question, team, do you understand what is needed to be done? And if the team doesn't, if the team have any questions, answer those questions. All right. So ensuring that everybody is good and happy in knowing what needs to be done. You don't have to have everything 100% ironed out, but at a basic level, yes, I know what I need to do, or there are some things that I need to go ask, but it should be minor things. Okay. We're not writing a requirements document, but it should be good enough where we feel that we can get work done. So take the first story. Teams look at it. Do we have all we need? If the answer is yes, then team, the question usually I would ask is, will you commit to this work for this coming sprint? The answer should be very simple because it's the first story. This is the first one that we're going to pull into our sprint, and you have nothing in your sprint right now. So guess what? The answer should be yes. So it's how do you know how much work you can put in? So take the first one, do that first. Then take the second one, ask the same question, pull it into the sprint, yes or no? Yes, then pull it in. Keep doing that until the team feels like, whoa, I think we feel like this is too much, or we feel like this is just right. It's like eating. How do you know when you are full? Well, you actually don't know until you take one bite at a time. Take one bite, your body have a feedback. It tells you whether you're full or not, and then you take the next bite. Same concept here. Take the first story, yes or no. Second story, yes or no, until the team feels they are about right. Usually, I like to do a fist of 5. How comfortable are you, team? So as a Scrum Master, how comfortable do you feel that you can accomplish all these stories that you have in the sprint backlog currently? Do a quick check, fist of 5. So for those of you that you don't know what fist of 5 is, it's a quick way to get consensus. 5 being yes, I completely agree. Basically you can go down to a 0. 0 means I totally am not comfortable. Or you can do the 3, 4, roughly I am comfortable. For me, my gut point is getting the team where they're not all 5, but about 4 to 3, a mix between the 4 to 3. Okay, so that's a good guide that I usually have. If a team feels about right, that's where you should stop. Now, along the way, there'll be conversation. Maybe that one last story is too big. When you say, everybody's 5, cool, take one more. And then you may start dropping down to maybe 4. And then you get to the point where maybe drop down to 3. And if in between, if you start seeing that, wait a minute, they are at about 2 or 3, then ask the team, what if we take one story out? Does that changes your confidence level? If it goes up, then that's good. You may have conversation in terms of negotiation back with the product owner. Say, hey, what about these other stories? Let's not worry about that. Let's take this one instead because that one is too big. Maybe let's leave it for the next sprint and take in a smaller one. You can have that negotiation that happens. Okay. Along the way, important, it must be ordered. How much work to commit? How do we know we have enough work? If this is your first time doing it, if this is your first sprint planning, you don't know. You don't have enough data to tell you, don't have any guidance other than your gut. Go with your gut. All right? Get to a point where, like I mentioned before, using fist of 5, get a comfortable level. All right? A little bit uncomfortable, it's okay, but not to the point where everybody's uncomfortable. Just do that. Run it for a couple of sprints. Once you've done a couple of sprints, you tend to know how many story points the team can commit to. Once you have this data, once you have a historical data, what do you do with it? Historical data is as a means, as a guide. You start looking at story points. I like to also look at number of stories the team pull in. you can't get a feel. Sometimes you can say, for this team, they get about 4 or 5 stories, and that's about all they can do. And it's okay. All right, do that. You don't have to get to precise absolutely 100%. And you don't want to fall into the trap where you follow your history. If your history say 10 points, you stay at 10 points. You don't want doing it. You want to actually stretch yourself, because over time, the team may get more proficient. So they may get more stories done, or their stories may tend to be a little bit bigger than normal, and the sizing may be smaller. So that's a gut feel, all right? Get a good gut feel. Let the team commit to how much they feel. Do not push the team. Product owner should not be pushing the number of work for the team. Nobody should. It's the team that commits, okay? Nobody should. We can ask the questions of, should you take this one? Can you do this? Yes or no? We want to do this as natural as possible to get enough data that allow us to become predictable down the road, okay? So no outside forces, don't force it. So learn from it, use your data, don't get locked down on it, do story points and number of stories. That's kind of what I like. So what happens if you don't finish your work? What happens if you commit to 5 stories and you only get 4 done? And the last one, you're halfway through, okay? So if you're halfway through, number one, one thing I like to say is the team doesn't get credit for it. You don't split your stories. I don't like splitting stories because there's no point. Why do you split stories when the work's not done? Keep the stories. It's not done. It's not done. The team doesn't demo the work because the work is not done. The team don't get credit for it. You don't get half your story points because you did half the work. It doesn't work that way. You only get credited for the work that's complete. So that story, imagine that story is a 3-point story. So it doesn't get done. What happens to it? It goes into your backlog, okay, as unfinished work. Then the question becomes, is it important for us to finish the work? Usually it is, okay? 9 out of 10 times it is. Sometimes it may not. So talk to product owner, is this still the highest priority in my next sprint? If it is, it just goes on to the next sprint. When it goes in the next sprints, when it comes in, when you have unfinished work that comes into your sprint planning, the team need to remember that is unfinished work. What that does is that it just reduces your capacity when you're planning for how much work to bring in. That's all it is. So unfinished work, the team kind of know how much is left that needs to do, pull in the rest of the stories one by one again to get a feel of how much in total they can do. So what if you are wrong? So it's kind of same thing like unfinished work. What if you're wrong? What if you're taking too much? Right? Well, if taking too much, then it's unfinished work. What if it's... so let's talk about taking too much. So if it's one story, I think that's simple enough. What if it's 3 stories, 4 stories? We haven't even started yet. So all that does is that put it back in the backlog. Is it still ranked high in terms of the backlog? If it is, it just goes on to the next sprint. That's all it is. What if you plan too little? If you plan too little, it's real simple. When you finish your work, just pull in more. Pull in the next story. If you're doing your backlog refinement well enough, you should already have stories in your backlog that is all ready for your sprint. Okay? So just talk to the product owner once the work is done. As an individual on the team, you need to bring up to the team that let everybody know, hey, I don't have any more work. Who should I help? Are there any help I can do? Or if there is no work I can help, then question will be, team, should I pull in my next story? Then talk to the product owner. As a team, should we pull in the next story or not? Okay, so that's as simple as that. What if you don't have enough time to finish the work and we don't want to pull those stories and you have some free time? What do you do with those? Now, I will swing one way, I don't know, left, what you can call this, but if you have some free time, if it just happen to be an hour or two in the end of the day, my thing is go home. All right, go home. And most people struggle with that. Cool. If you don't want to go home, then do this. In that time, what can you do to help your team? To help the organization? It could be technical depth. It could be learning new things. It could be sitting down doing pair programming, learning about if you are a back-end person, learn about front-end coding. If you are, potentially you don't have enough unit testing, start writing unit testing. If you don't have enough automation for QA, for example, start investing time in automation, right? And that's the good time. Or getting ready. I see some teams actually take some time off to get ready and make sure they, since it's been a while that they look through the stories, they actually re-look through the stories again to make sure they know, who's capable of doing what, what is needed, make sure they still remember it, so that when you get to sprint planning, it's fast, it's not too long. So I've seen teams do that too. So this whole notion of things that you can do. We're now working as a team, right? So there are things like, if you got some time, well, spend time working on team building, right? How do we work better as a team? It may be fun stuff. Go bowling, doing things like that to help you build and be more productive as a team. So too much work, simple, go into the next sprint. Too little work, pull in more work. And if you can't pull in more work, there are a bunch of other things you can do. Absolutely. I have not seen a team that doesn't have that. Now, worst come to worst, you don't have anything, guess what? Go home. It's okay. In my mind, go home. All right, so one of the things that usually happen when I talk to teams is that their sprint planning takes too long. All right, and teams struggle with that. Why is this meeting so long? For me, 4 hours is a long time. Anything beyond an hour is too long for sprint planning. So how do you reduce it? So number one, let's look at sprint planning. If you take too long, what other activities in sprint planning? Is it because you don't have stories ready and you are now trying to get them ready? So which means then you need to get better at backlog refinement. Is it that the team gets too detailed into a conversation of the stories? And if it does, then there is a question I tend to ask is, team, it feels like we've been in this story for quite some time. With this additional information, does it change what we're looking for? Do we need this or not? And oftentimes team can commit to it without those extra details because it doesn't change their commitment. It's just, teams as developers, they tend to like the technical, they like to solve the problem right there. Don't try to solve the problem, okay? You can put a clock. We usually like to put a timer on there that says, we're going to put a timer to 10 minutes. When the buzzer goes off, then we have to reassess it. Usually, I've seen that done pretty well in the past with some teams. Talk about time boxing on each story, getting a clock, backlog refinement being separated. One of the things that I think happens when team gets into too detail is they try to test out the stories during sprint planning. Tasking is an activity. Some teams has value, some team does not. The more mature it is, the less they spend on tasking. The way I feel is that you can do tasking after you committed to a sprint. So out of sprint planning, all we need to do is get a commitment to the number of stories that we're going to work on. All right. So I always say do that. So once you do that, guess what? The tasking is left at the team. Product owner doesn't need to be involved at that point. Scrum Master doesn't need to be involved. It's just the developers and the QAs, the team members that's doing the work. Tasking can be done a couple of ways. One is that after all this is done, sprint starts, teams then look at the first story. As a team, then we get together and say, okay, let's break down a little bit more tasking, who is doing what. Real simple way to do that. You can go to all your stories at the beginning of the sprint and do tasking that way. Some people like to put names on it and things like that. I tend to favor just in time. We know we have 6 stories that we committed to. We know we work on story number 1. Take the story number 1 first. Well, let's see who's working on that. All right. I think only 2 people can work on it, not more than 3 in that. Okay, cool. The rest of the people want to work on. Well, let's take the story number 2. All right. Do it that way until everybody knows what to do right there and then. Then go do the work. Okay, when the work is done, for example, story 2, maybe shorter, story 2 is done. Guess what? Now I've got people free. Now the people that are going to jump on the next work, do tasking on the next work. Just in time. The reason why I like that is because you don't know who's working on the story. You may plan it up front. Guess what? That person may take longer on that stories and they are not available. So I kind of like that. Okay, I like that concept of the tasking in terms of bringing out assignment or, not assignment, but who's doing what. Now you can do general tasking. As a team, you can do that, and that's fine. That shouldn't you take that long. General idea, task through those things, and leave it at that. Don't assign work. Let the team pull in work. I like pull. I don't like being pushed. Okay. So if you do that, then you can separate and say get through your sprint planning pretty fast. All right. Get to commitment. Get to sprint stories in your sprint backlog. Get to a sprint goal, and then break. The team can then continue on. That's sprint planning, folks. Hopefully it's been helpful to you. If you like it, give me a thumbs up. If you don't like it, give me a thumbs down. Plus, give me a comment as to why you don't like. For those of you that are new to my channel, please remember to subscribe so you get notified of new videos as I post them. Hopefully this has been helpful. Bye.